There are so many big challenges facing civil engineering firms today in terms of sustainable long-term growth. Are we still handling the remote work effectively? How can we hire enough people to do all the work that's out there? How can we hire and integrate high-level leaders into our organization or upskill the ones that we have? Well, in this episode, I'm lucky to have back with me Michael Shamma, President and CEO at Sam Schwartz Engineering. Michael was on the show a few months ago, but we didn't get to dive into some of these really challenging leadership topics. So we're going to do that today. And we cover all of these challenges and provide some solutions of how you as a leader can tackle these in your firm. Before we jump in with Mike, a quick word from our sponsor, Tensar.
Check out Tensar Plus, the award-winning design software for construction professionals to design with geosynthetics and calculate their value on projects. Tensar Plus is simple to use with a powerful engineering system at its core. Whether you're designing a crane pad or need to build a temporary road over muck, the cost, time, and carbon savings can be calculated, making comparison with alternatives simple. Whatever you're working on, Tensar Plus is your toolbox for success.
All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest back onto the show today. Michael Shamma is President and CEO at Sam Schwartz, and Mike has actually been on the show before, back on episode 21, but we talked a little bit afterwards. We felt like we had some unfinished business. We could go a little deeper on leadership, so we're having him back. Mike, welcome back to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Thank you, Anthony. Glad to be back.
And we're happy to have you back. And I know, like I said, we had Mike on before. We'll certainly link to the prior episode, but Mike, just to kind of kick us off again, maybe you can just provide a little bit of an overview of what Sam Schwartz does, what kind of services you provide, and kind of your journey to Sam Schwartz and how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you first what we believe. We believe that communities should be livable, sustainable, and resilient. Now, we believe that transportation alternatives should be affordable and accessible and equitable to everyone. So what do we do to get there? We provide transportation planning and traffic engineering services. We also do environmental planning, transit planning, civil engineering, and stakeholder engagement. So all these services, we kind of offer them in an integrated way to solve urban issues and help our clients do the things that we said we believe in. So that's in a nutshell what Sam Schwartz is.
Great. And I know in that first episode, we talked a lot about your career. You've been in the public sector. You went over to the private sector. Again, maybe just recap that career for our listeners, for new listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started in the private sector back in 1988. For 1 year, the economy was pretty bad. So there was really not a lot of work coming in. So I went to work for the state of New York, and I worked there for almost 27 years between New York State DOT and the Thruway Authority, which was at the time a combination of the Thruway and the Canal Corporation. So that was my public sector career. And then after that, I left the public sector and I rejoined the private sector. And I've been now in the private sector a little bit over 8 years. With Sam Schwartz, I've been there for 4.5 years now. And as president and CEO, almost 2 years.
Okay, great. And so, really what Mike and I are going to get into today is leadership. We'll dig a little deeper on leadership. Right now in the industry that we're in, things are booming. There's a lot of infrastructure needs. There's lots of work out there, but it also means a lot of companies in our industry are kind of a little bit frantic. I mean, they're growing quickly, but there's problems that are associated with that, like trying to find enough people and keep up with the workload and stress levels. And so we're going to kind of dive into some leadership strategies and tactics today. And Mike, I want to start off. I mean, we're still in a situation today where there are a lot of people who are leading remotely. What would you say are some of the kind of challenges that you've observed in leading teams, maybe remotely? And how have you seen, how are people dealing with them? What do you see out there when there's still a lot of that going on?
Yeah, it was a mixed bag. So obviously at the very beginning of the pandemic, we all went remote 100%, right? I mean, at least in New York, my point of reference is in New York, even though we have offices all over the country. I know in some states they never went remote. They just kept coming into the office. They drive in their cars. They're not on public transit. They're not in a big urban area. So it's a different mix. But I'll talk specifically from a New York perspective. In New York, we pretty much shut down. So on day one, we had to be operational. And any good leader would anticipate something like this is going to happen. I mean, nobody knew how long it was going to last. So actually, the Friday before shutdown, we asked half the employees to work from home. We tested the system because I wanted to see if we had the bandwidth for it. Everything worked great. So Monday we went on shutdown, not knowing it was going to happen that soon, and everything worked great. We made sure that all our employees had the equipment that they need at home, that they were comfortable, because that makes a difference. Because when you're in the office, you get up, you move around, you talk to your colleagues at home. There are times I remember we were in front of the screen for 10 hours and we just take bathroom breaks basically. And it does get exhausting. So unless your setup is ergonomic, then you're going to be hurting physically. Believe it or not, the first 3 months during the pandemic, the production was probably the best we ever had. The billability, the amount of hours we were billing, and I think everybody just rallied and did what they had to do, and just we didn't miss a beat. But as time went on, I think people, we're human beings. We're not designed to be remote. We're not designed to be 6 feet apart. We like each other's company. So I would say, loneliness, it probably is missing your colleagues. I miss my colleagues, even though I was seeing them every day. I mean, sometimes, you have lunch together, you may have coffee together, you may go out for a drink after work. It's that connectivity, that connection that you have with your colleagues. I think we miss that. In terms of the work itself, again, we didn't miss a beat on that. We started doing, just because we missed each other's company, we'd start doing like some fun activities. So we would have happy hours. So actually we would set up, I remember one time we set up like a MS Teams, call, and we set up different rooms and we called them different things, like the piano room, the harp room, and you could just jump between those two rooms and you just don't know who you're going to find in that room. And then you're having a drink, your colleagues having a drink. Some of them would have their dog on their lap or their kid on their lap, and we would just talk, not about work. We just kind of hanging out basically. So I like doing that. We did some games, and then I personally would call people randomly, just pick a person, call them, and just say, how are you doing? What's going on? Are you doing okay? So I think you have to stay connected that way, because we need that. We all need that. And people would check on me as well and say, Mike, how are you doing? So that's what we did during the pandemic to get through that. And we got through it okay. So, and then, monitoring the situation. And I remember I was obsessed with monitoring the numbers of infections and, unfortunately, death and hospitalization, all that. When we thought collectively that it was safe now to get back to the office, we started slow. We said, look, the office is open, it's safe, it's sanitized, all these things, you can come back. Some people came back, some people didn't. And then as time went on, we said, okay, let's be in the office, a couple days a week. And then we said, let's be in the office 3 days a week. So that's what we're doing now. We're in the office 3 days a week. The other 2 is your choice. So some people come in 5 days a week, some people don't. I like the flexibility. I think it's a good thing. And when we did that, I basically told the staff, I don't foresee us ever going back 100% in the office. I think the flexibility is good. I think employees now expect it. But I do see probably us maybe going back to the office, let's say 4 days a week instead of 3 or instead of 5. I think having that one day where you have the option to come in or not come in. Even before that, I know there were some companies that told employees you could work from home on Fridays, or for Sam Schwartz specifically, we said, if you've done all your work for the week, you can leave at 2 o'clock on Friday, in case you're going away for the weekend and so forth. So, I like where we ended up. On the days that we have, each office, I kind of let them do their own thing. In New York, we have a couple days a month where it's everybody in the office on the same day. We still have the same amount of real estate, so we do fit everybody. I know some companies downsize, which I think is a mistake, honestly, even though it's a big expense, real estate, but I think you still have to accommodate your employees. And I can tell you on the days that everyone is in the office, I feel the energy. I feel that
Mm.
the employees are happy, they're connected, they're mentoring each other, learning from each other. We provide a lunch or, some other thing to just draw everybody in. And I just love the days when everybody's in the office. It kind of feels like the old days where
Mhm.
everybody, before the
Yeah.
pandemic. So that's where we are now, and I don't see that changing. Some companies went all remote.
Yeah.
Some companies, they have everybody back in the office. So it's kind of a mixed bag out there.
Mike, the 2 days, like you said, like 2 days a week, it's flexible for people. Are those like for certain offices typically like the same 2 days, or do they pick, or how does that look? I'm just curious as to how you like strategically plan that out, or if it's just more up to them.
Yeah, so they do their own thing, and even within the same office, different teams may do different things. So, in essence, I mean, we're a business, we're a company that provides a service, and everything you do has to be around not just providing flexibility for the employees, but really the primary purpose is how do you structure your activities, how do you get together so you can provide the best service that you can provide. So some teams choose to be the days that they're going to be in the office together. In some, again, like for New York, we all come in twice a month, and it's the
Right.
same, everybody's in. But on the other days, the teams decide what works for them so they can deliver what they need to deliver.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like that a lot. And something you said at the beginning I thought was really important. You talked about how like right after when COVID happened, kind of everybody kind of rallied, and there was super
Mhm.
productivity for 90 days. And I think that's kind of like an analogy kind of you made me think of there is like, if your body sustains, let's say, an injury,
Mhm.
immediately your body will like pump blood to that area and you can like, your adrenaline push like gets you through it, right? But then like all of a sudden you come back to life and say, I'm human, I have an injury, it's going to like slow me down to some point. And so I think like a lot of companies were able to kind of have that rally and say, wow, we were more billable than ever, more productive than ever. But then what happened, to your other point, is that people were sitting at their computers for 10 days and just trying to get through it and do stuff. And then people started to wear down a little bit.
Mhm.
And then I think like over time, what I've seen in terms of what companies have been successful, like kind of in a hybrid environment, goes to your point of having some kind of a strategy, right? Like
Yeah.
there could certainly be some flexibility built into it. Like you pick the 2 days or whatnot, but there has to be some kind of a strategy. Like we're in the office 3 days, we're flexible a couple of days. We're all coming in once or twice a month and doing get-togethers. And so I'm happy to hear that. But in terms of like yourself, like personally, from a leadership perspective, when you think about remote, versus in person, is there anything you do differently, any different approaches that you take as a leader when you're trying to like lead people or, run meetings or, run projects when you're in person with people or when you're doing things virtually?
Yeah, so before I get into that, actually, if you look at REBNY, which is the Real Estate Board of New York, just did a study, and we're a little bit above 70% in the office, back in the office as compared to 2019 levels, Tuesday through Thursday. A little bit less on Monday, and the lowest day is Friday. So
Yeah.
it's not just for us. Everybody's coming back, and because I think people like their routine in the city, going to get a coffee,
Yeah,
going out
for
for
sure.
lunch, seeing their colleagues. But in terms of, for me, I mean, the key thing is when you're remote is communication and setting expectation, right? The other thing that so you just have to make sure that the teams are talking. There's regular check-ins, and the outcome that is desired is known to everybody, and then you agree on the steps that you need to do to get there. So it's really up to the team leader to make sure that their team is working together, collaborating, producing what they need to produce, and then that they're healthy, right? So there are two things that I like to measure. One is, basically the organizational product that you produce, and the other one is the organizational health,
Hmm.
because a healthy organization will perform. Um, and but if you're performing, you don't doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy. You could be
Right.
sitting on a sinkhole. You just don't know it. That it hasn't, nothing bad has happened, but it just happens like that. So I think it's very important if you're remote to make sure that you're not losing your culture, that you're not losing the connection. I mean, you know, I know for some companies who went fully remote, where is the loyalty then, right? And people become kind of maybe transient workers, and it's like, I'm not loyal to you. I don't really know you. I've never met you. I just work remote with you. If somebody gives me more money, maybe I'll go there because I'm just not connected to you unless I believe in the mission and you know that whatever that company is doing. You know, for me, like I said, as a leader, when we're working remote, is just making sure that I still have my fingers on the pulse by communicating, by checking in with people, by making sure that the leaders who work in the company are checking with their employees and making sure that the clients are happy. You know, that's the other thing. I mean, we're talking about the employees, but how do you stay connected to your clients
Hmm.
when you're, you know, remote and they're remote, all right? So, and I can tell you that, you know, some of the clients, I mean, we just text each other, hey, Mike, how you doing? And I was really humbled with the fact that some of the clients would actually check on me as opposed to the other way around. So that was a great thing and shows that you're connected and not only that your colleagues, work colleagues, because you know they're the client, we're providing a service, but we're still colleagues, we're in the same industry, we're in it for the same reason, and we just want to make sure that you know everybody's okay. I mean, COVID to me taught us a lot, and it really taught us that we're humans. And I like your analogy a lot about the adrenaline. I mean, you know, we all rallied and we all did what we have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you make a really good point about the idea of, organizational health. And, I think as a leader, you want to make sure that you're just in constant communication with your team. I don't mean constant like 24/7, but I mean like, you're meeting them at least in the beginning of the week. I think personally, in setting them up for the week, making sure they have what they need to
Mhm.
succeed, even if you're not necessarily in person with them, and then you're getting the team together from time to time. How are things going? And I think that's important. I think the point about the clients is really important too. I do try to make it a point just to make sure that I don't get like too many days out without connecting with a client, even if it's a
Mhm.
simple email, simple pick up the phone and give them a call, because really your goal with your clients, of course, is to provide as much value to them as you can. And, you can't do that if you're not really like plugged in and have a good feeling for how they're doing, what they're up to, what are their needs, and so on and so forth. So I think that's something that is really important. I think it's been more challenging maybe through everything that's gone on, but there are obviously ways to reach out to people. It's just a matter of being maybe a little bit more intentional about it.
I think that's a very key word, is because when you're in the office, you know, a lot of progress actually and a lot of communication happens outside of meetings, not
Mm,
at meetings. They happen in the hallway, they happen, you
right.
stop at somebody's office and talk. That does not happen when you're remote, right? There's no drop-in. So I think the key is intentional. You have to be so much more organized about communication, about expectation, about production, all of that, because it just doesn't happen organically versus when you're in the office.
Yeah, and I think too, like for myself, whenever there's a chance these days now, if there's a conference or something and I can get there, it's great because you just don't see people as much, or at least we didn't for a couple of years. And so again, if there's some of those avenues to connect with people, I try to like now be a little more cognizant of looking for those connection points so I can leverage them, just because
Yeah.
they may be all we have these days.
Yeah, I remember. I'll tell you a funny story. The very first ACEC meeting that was in person, and it was still mixed, right? So not everybody was out. So I go to these CEO forums.
Hmm.
So I'm in a room. There's probably about 45 people in the room, and we're talking about. They took a poll who's still remote, who's hybrid, and so one person raised their hand. I forget what company they're from, and even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. And he said, "Remote works. We're never going back to the office. That's it. We're always going to be remote. That works." So I raised my hand. I said, "If remote works, why are we all here in person, right? I mean, we could have done the CEO
Right.
roundtable remotely, but it did really nothing that substitute for in-person
Sure. Yeah.
connection. I mean, that's how I met you, right? Through ACEC.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
you know, if we were all on a virtual call, I probably wouldn't have met you. I mean, I would know
Yeah,
you're on
for
the
sure.
call, but, you know, we wouldn't have a side conversation.
Yeah. No, it's so true. You have, you have opportunities to step aside with someone, introduce yourself, and learn a little bit about them that you just don't get to do online. And I had this conversation recently on another podcast. I was talking with someone that went into business development and engineering, and she was talking about how she had to like push herself to get out there. And the one thing that I kind of always told myself when I was working as a consulting engineer was, if I don't go to this networking event, I can guarantee myself that nothing's going to happen. Right.
Yeah.
Like if you don't go, the chances of you meeting someone or something happening is zero. If you go, hey, maybe you're not going to meet a ton of people, but you're going to put yourself in a position to possibly make some new connections. And that's
Yeah.
important.
That's and you remind me of something that's really important too. When you're working remotely, I mean, I remember when I was younger, and I'm sure you remember the same thing. I mean, you develop friendships, you develop connections. I mean, your friends are the people you work with most of the time, you know. So by being remote, by not going to the office, by not going to meet clients at events, by not going to meet colleagues from other companies so you can team up and things like that, you're really losing something. Your development as a professional, I think, will lag behind. So it really is that important. Because we make sure like our younger staff go to events and they're connected and they're involved in organizations like WTS and ACEC and ASE and so forth, because I believe that's really important for their career development.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And not to go off too much on a tangent, but I'm actually reading a book right now. I think it's called The Good Life Project, and it's about like a study that's been going on at Harvard for like, I don't know, 100 years. And it's basically like they've been studying these people from when they were like really young until they, passed on. And then they go to their family members and they keep studying about like happiness and what's made them happy in their life. And pretty much every person in the study comes back to relationships, right? Doesn't come back
Yeah.
to their job or the money or their house or where they lived or whatever the case
Mhm.
may be. It was that they constantly were in communication with people. They were in parts of communities, they were in clubs, and they built these relationships. And so
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that the last few years has challenged us with and made it harder for us to do. And now that people are starting to get back together, I think you're seeing some of that come back, which is a very, very positive thing.
Yeah.
So, one of the significant challenges in our industry, Mike, is developing leaders who can effectively lead others, right? I mean, as technical professionals, many consulting professionals, whether it could be public or private professionals, they kind of grow in their careers as technical professionals, and then they take on a new role and they become managers. Maybe they start as a project manager, but as they advance, they're eventually probably going to need to oversee maybe other project managers or other, engineers or technical professionals in their companies. And it's become very difficult. So I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about like your insights on the whole leadership progression in our industry and how successful leaders can be developed in an organization in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, and I really appreciate you doing this podcast and the what you do, because it's not something that we learn in engineering school. I mean, it's just you learn engineering skills, right? You're not learning, and then you do work in teams, working on projects, but you're not really learning leadership skills. And without those skills, I mean, just it's incredibly difficult to be effective and efficient and all the things that you need to do. So for me, leadership development and my job as the president and CEO of the company is to make sure that we have the right people in the company and we're developing them, right? So I think 80% of it starts with recruitment. So bringing the right people in. And this is something I borrowed from John Maxwell. So it's basically recruitment, positioning, and then equipping, right? Those are the three things that you need. So recruitment is just you make sure that you're bringing the people who have what it takes into the company. Positioning is just that you make sure that they're matched with their skill set. Because if you put someone into an area, let's say someone, we have business development, we have technical skills, we have mentoring, we have people who are project managers. I mean, there's different things that you do in an engineering company. And if you have someone who's may not have the aptitude to do business development, and that's where you put them, they're not going to do a great job with it because that's not their love. That's not what they love to do. So putting people in the right seat on the bus is important, but then equipping them is really important. I always tell people my job is to make sure that I provide the environment that you need to be successful. It's not my job to make you successful, but my job is to give you everything that you need to be successful. There's something that I heard once from someone, it always stuck in my mind. He said, it's my job to take the horse to the water. It is my job to make the horse thirsty. It is not my job to make the horse drink, right? So you just give the horse everything it needs, and then if it wants to drink, it will drink. So that's my job. I always tell my folks that I work with that your job is to multiply. So you have to be generous. You have to be generous with your connections. You have to be generous with your knowledge. You have to be generous with your time. You have to be generous with your mentoring. You have to be generous with the people that you're leading, meaning you have to develop into the leader that you are. And there's, again, borrowing from John Maxwell, the 5 levels of equipping someone to be successful. He said, first, I do it well. And that's a competence level, right? I have to make sure that I'm competent. Number 2, once I'm competent, I do it, and then you're with me. So now I'm mentoring you. Number 3 is you do it, and then I'm with you. So now you're kind of independent. You're doing it. I'm still there checking, making sure you're doing things right. And then the 4th step is you do it, and you do it well. Now you don't need me anymore. But really, the ultimate step is you do it, and someone else is with you, right? So it's now I've done my job by being competent, by helping develop you. But unless you go develop someone else, I have not done my job. So that's kind of what I do with our leaders. I'm always telling them that I need to see you multiply. So who are the leaders you're developing, and how are you developing them? I do a lot of it. Anyone who works with me will tell you that I tell a lot of stories. And I think that's just an easy way for people to remember something that you've said, as opposed to say, hey, by the way, remember this. But if I tell them a story, they'll always remember the story. I see people 15 years later, I say, I remember when you told me that story. People like stories, they remember stories. So, you have to be, the people that you bring in, I mean, they have to be curious about knowledge. They have to always be learning. They have to like people. They have to be competent, as I mentioned. I mean, there are 3 things that you need in a person. One is, and you also always see they're easy to remember, competence that's a must. That's the legs of the table, right? The second one is they have to be able to communicate effectively, because you can't really be a leader unless you're a good communicator. And then number 3 is connectivity, relationships, things like that. So you have to be able to relate to people, you have to care about them, and you have to want them to succeed, and just make sure that they have everything to succeed. I know I'm talking at a very high level, but that's kind of my philosophy on it.
No, for sure. I mean, that's why we decided to do this second episode, to get into some of these things. And I really like, again, the analogies that you use. I like John Maxwell a lot myself, read a lot of his stuff. And so essentially, I really like the part about multiplying. I think it's a good message. And so basically what you're saying is, if you do bring the horse to the water and the horse does drink, that horse then has to go get another horse and bring him to the water.
Yes.
Right. Essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that that's the important part, because I think, helping to develop someone into a leader in itself is very challenging. But then, having them develop more leaders is bringing that to the next level, right? And I think that a lot of the firms, and I'm sure a lot of the executives that listen to this show, are probably dealing with the same kind of rapid growth situation that a lot of people in the industry are dealing with right now with the infrastructure work. And it's developing these leaders fast enough, which kind of brings me into the next question nicely, which is, probably one of the biggest challenges in our industry right now, which is hiring the right people. And you talked about the importance of that here, particularly leaders. And, I've been doing some research on this as we're growing as well at EMI. And I think one of the areas where a lot of organizations struggle a little bit is they'll continue to hire people at the staff level, but they won't think about maybe trying to hire and bring in some leaders, maybe even a little bit before you need them, or, as you're starting to grow, because you have those people in place. And that can be a game changer for your industry. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the process of kind of onboarding someone into your organization, hiring, onboarding them, someone who's already has experience and they've kind of built up some habits. Like, talk about how you can, number one, how valuable that can be to your company, bringing a leader, but then maybe integrating them kind of into your culture. I think it's a huge, huge issue today.
Yeah, absolutely. When I interview, I mean, at that level, I'm personally involved in the interview process.
Hmm.
I'm not involved in every interview, but for a leader, I'm part of that process. And even if it's not someone who's reporting to me, even the next level, I want to meet them before we make an offer to them. And when I talk to them, it's more of a conversation during the interview. I talk to them about the vision of the company, my vision, our vision, and I talk to them about our why, what drives us. And I talk to them about the culture and the type of employees we have. So I paint a picture for them in what it looks like if they came in to be part of the company. And I want to make sure there's a fit that that's attractive to them, because even if they're an attractive hire, I want to make sure that the company that they're coming into and the culture and so forth is attractive to them. So it starts to me right there at that conversation before they even come in. I share a lot with them about my own personal philosophy on leadership and relationships and caring about people, empathy, compassion, all these things we talked about last time. And if they're still interested and they say, yeah, I can absolutely visualize myself as part of that. Like I want to be part of that. And they come in, and now they're an employee in the company. I mean, you have your all onboarding stuff that happens, which people call onboarding. But to me, it's more than that, right? So I, I make sure that they're matched up with someone
Mm.
who's another leader in the company, because it's not a mentor per se, because they're already leaders in their own right. But someone to shadow them and kind of help them navigate the day-to-day stuff. Because even though you go through onboarding, I've gone through many onboardings, and they're not always 100% effective, because you're getting bombarded with information in a 4 hour period, that your first day on the job. So I just never remember everything that people are telling me on their first day. It's too much. So I make sure that they're shadowed by someone that knows the company, knows the culture, knows who's who, and they can help them figure out where to get information, where to get help, things like that. If it's a leader at a high level, I don't want them spending their time doing their expense sheet, or I mean, it's like the
Right.
administerial things. I make sure they have someone to help them with that. I want to get the maximum value out of their time, and I want to make sure they're getting the maximum value out of their time. So we make sure that there's clear expectations in terms of what they need to deliver, but also it's not just clear, it's realistic, right? I mean, the engineering business doesn't, it's not like you call somebody and you make a sale and you're done, right? I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot of pre-positioning that happens. There's a lot of, relationship building, project, an RFP may come out, then you have to go after it, then a selection happening, all that takes time. So that person may not be able to produce something for 6 months or a year and a half. So you make sure that I know we like to measure outcomes, but there's a lot of activity that has to happen in between to get to that outcome. So you just have to make sure that all the activities that need to happen are happening, right? You're not measuring the activity, you're just making sure that the person knows what needs to be done. And a lot of times, again, at that level, they know coming in the door what needs to
Right.
be done. They've done it in other places. We've hired, so I guess I'll use an example where, if you hire someone like myself coming in from the public sector, like how do you switch your brain? So
Right.
now you're not a public sector person, and you're a private person. We hired someone who's came from the public sector, a great leader. He's been in the public sector his entire career. Now he retired and he wants to continue to work. So now he's in the private sector. So instead of just hiring one person, we hired two. We hired someone from the private sector and someone from the public sector. We paired them up. This
Mm.
person knows how the private sector works. This person is a great leader. And, and we just, like, on weekly basis, we would check in, would make sure that, encouragement is there, because sometimes, like, the process to get to where you need to get to, maybe a little bit tedious. So, and I can tell you now, we're a little bit, year and a half into it. Great success. They're both very successful. They work with each other very well.
Mm.
They've brought in a lot of projects. it's just been a success story. So
That's great.
it's just a lot of attention and checking in and making sure they're paired up with somebody, understanding the vision, understanding the product, understanding all the steps that need to happen to get there. And you just stay with them every step of the way. And now, like John Maxwell said, now they're doing it and someone else is with them. I'm not really that involved anymore.
No, I think that's great. And I think that that's something, like you said, you want to, when you hire someone at that level, you want to certainly let them be able to, use their leadership abilities that they've built up. You don't want
Yeah.
to hold them back. And it sounds like this mentoring arrangement or partnership arrangement, these two people, is
Mhm.
a really helpful way for them to integrate and do that.
Yep.
So one question I have for you is to follow up on the interview process that, you said you get involved in some of the interviews. You mentioned before the three C's, which I thought were great, competence, communication, connectivity. Are you in the interviews like gauging their three C's?
Yes, I am actually. And it's funny, like I consider myself a good judge of character. I mean, no one, has 100% success
Sure.
rate, but I think my success rate is pretty good. And sometimes, like we were hiring someone, well, we wanted to hire someone at one point, and she was local, so I asked the person who was talking to her. I said, you know what, just set up a coffee for us, half hour. So we had coffee, and within 5 minutes, I knew that person I wanted to hire.
Wow.
I mean, it was that quick. It's not always that quick, but because of the kind of work that we do, sometimes though, the one thing that we personally, like at Sam Schwartz, struggle with, maybe it's different for other companies. Our culture, it's kind of hard to describe, but we want to make the world a better place. I guess that's the easiest way to describe it. So a lot of the people that we hire, they're also attracted to public service. So we had someone, this person specifically, coming from the public sector.
Sure.
Great hire. She came in, she did a great job for a year, and then the public sector lured her back for a bigger and better job than the one she left, right? So that happens to us 2 3 times, at least since I've been there, where we hire a great person, great talent, they come in from the public sector, and I ask them when they come in, are you ready to make that jump? I've made the jump, right? But I was later in my career, and we've hired a lot of people from the public sector who've stayed,
Sure.
but we've hired some who came and then went back to the public sector. So, now we have more friends back in the public sector
Yeah.
because they
Well,
came in and saw the company. But yeah, I mean, it is, I am gauging those things because I want to see if they have all these three things and if they're a good cultural fit for the company as well.
all right. And that takes us kind of perfectly again into the last thing I want to talk to you about today, which is culture. I think it's something that is probably the most important thing, right? That someone in your position can really focus on to grow a firm sustainably, like over the long term. And, we've talked about a lot of things today that can be challenging. We talked about remote work. We talked about hiring the right people, developing leaders, getting those higher level leaders on board and integrated. And all of them definitely tie into the idea of culture. So just talk to me, Mike, about what culture means to you and how you focus on it as part of your role at Sam Schwartz.
Yeah, so to me, culture is like very simply like, how do you feel when you're at work?
That's a great way to think
You
of
know,
it.
and I remember, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, the first day I walked into Sam Schwartz, um, it, it's like the way I felt about being there. I mean, there are days where I've had, I didn't have a lot of jobs, but within the public sector, I had a lot of different jobs, right? And there are days where you walk into the office and the first day you walk in, you feel something, right? You feel
Hmm.
like I belong here. And then there are days where you walk in and you say, what am I doing here? So when I walked into Sam Schwartz, I felt like it was a hub of energy and innovation. And I could feel it on day one. Like the first hour I was there, I could feel the energy. I could feel that people liked each other. I could, you just see it, you feel it, you touch it. So culture to me is just that simple. It's like, and then the other thing I would say, more on a deeper level is what drives everybody there, right? So I think that the companies that have good culture, they all understand their why. I mean, Simon Sinek talks about
Sure.
this, Apple versus Microsoft, right? It's
Yeah.
like Apple is like, we exist to help teachers teach and students learn, right?
Hmm.
It's very simple. The very simple why. Versus, I exist because I want to be number one. I don't want to be number one because there is no such a thing, right? I just want to do a good job. I want to make sure our clients are happy. I want to make sure that the work that we do is in line with what we believe, our why. That's culture to me. Is it a culture of collaboration, or is it a culture of competition? Are we competing with one another at work, or are we encouraging each other to all succeed? Kind of like rising tides, right? Raise
Sure.
all ships, right? So that's what I feel when I'm at Sam Schwartz. I don't feel like we're competing with one another. I feel like we're all in it for the same reason. We're all there to help each other succeed. That's culture to me. And I, any CEO, I think, should be the chief culture officer.
Hmm.
Your job is to make sure that you perpetuate that culture. And there are times, I mean, you may have a good performer, but that performer could be poison to the culture,
Right.
right? And I've seen that. I haven't seen it at Sam Schwartz, but I've seen it in other companies where somebody like brings in, I mean, we're private business engineering. They sometimes, like, you get measured by how much work you bring in.
Right.
But I can tell you, like, talking about the performance versus the health,
Yeah.
if you keep that person as much work as you're bringing in, it's going to hurt your company down the road because it may drive other people out who are also performing. So
Yeah.
to me, it's really important to pay attention to all these things.
Yeah. I really liked that question you gave, how people feel at work, or, how do you feel at work, which kind of can really describe the culture. I think that's a really kind of simple but kind of powerful way to look at it, if you will. And I think that if it's someone's job is to focus on the culture of the company, then it gives you a good framework of, kind of making sure people feel good here. Right.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's not much more difficult than that. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into it. But I'm saying, from a big picture, if you're standing back and you're thinking about the culture of the company, you're just thinking, when people come to the office every day, when they get on their video calls, what do they feel about
Yeah.
work, people they work with, and the work they do here. So I think that's a great way to look at it, because I think sometimes culture becomes just too complicated and people try to overanalyze things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that hard.
Yeah, and we've had, I mean, the last 2 3 years have been tough. Whether it's George Floyd or COVID, and unless you feel like, the company where you are supports you, and you feel like you belong there, it's just, it's difficult. I mean, that loyalty to the company, that loyalty to your colleagues, that connectivity with your company and your colleagues kind of goes away. So, we make sure, I mean, you don't have to agree with every single person in the company on every single
Right.
thing, but you have to respect each other, respect each other's opinion, and make sure that everybody, I mean, it gets deeper than that. Like you said, I mean, how are you making sure that everybody, like, you talk about, we're here, we're going to professionally grow our people and all that. Well, how are
Right.
you doing that, right?
Right.
Are you making sure that everybody is getting exciting projects to work on? Or like, I know, working for the state, sometimes you say, no, no, that person is good at this, keep giving them that work, right?
Right.
Well, are you doing them any favor? I don't
Right.
think so,
Right.
unless that's what they want. I mean, some people
Right.
say, you know what, I just want to do drainage analysis for the rest of my life. That's all I love. Fine. I try to encourage them to do other things, but they decide. I don't decide. But if I see someone who's good at something, now my job is to make sure that I get them out of that comfort zone, and take that glue, dissolve it, and bring them to the next level to do something, maybe bigger. So a lot of times, well, most time, like the people I interact with, I always want to know, like, what is it that they want for themselves,
Yeah.
and my job is to help them get there.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And that's something I like to do here at EMI, is constantly check in with people on, are you happy with your role and what you're doing here? Right. Because if you're not, then, you might be really good at it, to your point, Mike, but if they're really good at it and they're doing it all day, every day, and they're not feeling fulfilled, or they feel like there could be other things they could be doing, it's kind of your job to figure that out, kind of as their supervisor, leader, and put them on that path, because you want to keep them engaged. You want to keep them excited about what they're doing on a daily basis. And I do think that that's important. So
Yeah.
last thing, as we just wrap up here, for those kind of aspiring leaders in our industry, they want to get to the higher levels of their organization. What's maybe one last piece of advice that you can leave them with as we wrap up here today, Mike?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I just had a conversation with someone about this because we had an open position in management, right? And the person wanted that. But in my opinion, that's not his strength. So I kind of had to think of an analogy, and I said, you know what? I said, for anybody in your career, you're gonna walk up and you're gonna see a bunch of different ladders, and they're leaning against different things, right? So one is maybe becoming a super project manager. One, maybe you become a technical expert. One, maybe you become an office leader. One, you
Mm,
become a CEO, whatever the ladder is. And at the top of that ladder, there's a prize, right? And then you have to get there. If you start climbing up the wrong ladder, you're not going to get to the thing that you want. So I always ask people, is like, why do you want this? Like, what is it that's attractive for you? Like, what is it that you want? And as you go on this discussion, and I don't tell them the answers or what I personally think. I try to go with them on like a self-discovery journey kind of thing. And I say, just analyze what you're asking for and what is it that you want and what is it that you're good at. And, you try to match all these things. And this one specific person, he told me, he said, yeah, I get it. He said, I don't really want this. He said, that's what I want, not the thing that's open now, because he's a really good technical person. And I think he would be very mismatched in managing, leading people, right?
sure.
I mean, he's a genuine person, very authentic, but his skill set, and my job as a leader is to see that very good technical person. And I said, there is a prize in itself. There is a prize at the top of that ladder as well. It's different than this other one. But I think this ladder is easier for you to climb, and I think you'd be more fulfilled. So, my advice for people normally is don't compare yourself to other people.
Mm,
Don't just go for the open position. Understand yourself better and your strength and the things that you love to do, because you want to be excited about work every single day. It's because I'm doing the things I love. And sometimes being a manager may not be what you love. It's not easy being a leader. It's not easy being a manager. Managing a project is one thing, leading people is a different thing. We talk about operations with financial performance and all these different metrics. I mean, if that's what you want, great, but may not be what you want after all. So I would say listen. If you want to be a good leader, you have to be a good listener. I read something recently which I thought it stuck with me. It says, when I'm talking, chances are I'm repeating something I already know. When I'm listening, chances are I'm learning something new, right? So uh, listen to people, like we talked earlier about when you hire people at leadership level, learn from them. Don't just think you're going to teach them something. They're going to teach you something. As a matter of fact, you hire someone who just came out of college, they're going to teach you something as well. So unless you're willing to listen and learn, you're not going to grow.
yeah, that's great. And that does go back some pieces of that to what you said earlier about, making sure you put the right people in the right seats,
Mhm.
right? Kind of that analogy with the ladders is like, they were going to go up the ladder, meaning they would have been on the wrong seat for them on the
Yeah.
bus, so to speak, and they wouldn't have been happy there. So all good stuff. Well, Mike, thanks again so much for coming back on the show again. Michael Shamma, President and CEO of Sam Schwartz. We were happy to have you back. We talked about some great stuff here, and who knows, maybe we get you on again in a couple of months. But thanks so much, Mike. We really do
Th-
appreciate it.
Thank you, Anthony. It's always fun.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mike. Again, this is the second time he's been on the show. He was on episode 21, which we'll put a link to in the comments below. But really just thinking at a high level. And I think that this episode is great if you're the CEO of a firm or if you're a working civil engineer and you want to understand the challenges that your firm is dealing with, because you can figure out how to help them solve some of these and provide the most value to your firm. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.